Is your privacy at stake? More so, is your right to access information, particularly from the government, at stake? Opposition, India Bloc, has today claimed that Section 44 of 3 of the Digital Personal Data Protection Act destroys the right to information. It also claims that it narrows the scope of the nature of information that can be disclosed, claiming it's more restrictive. 120 MPs of the India Bloc parties, including leader of the opposition Rahul Gandhi, signed a joint memorandum for the repeal of this section, and it will be submitted to the Information Technology Minister Ashwini Vaishnaw. In fact, Section 8(1)(j) of the RTI Act allows for withholding of personal information if its disclosure was unrelated to any public activity or interest, or would result in an unwarranted invasion of privacy. However, this restriction was subject to an important safeguard. That is, if the Central Public Information Officer or the State Public Information Officer or the appellate authority determined that disclosing the information served a larger public interest, it still could be made available. Now, what does Section 44(3) of the new Act do? The opposition claims it removes this exception. That is, essentially, the opposition claims the change keeps essential details about public servants confidential, diminishing overall public accountability, and blocks access to information vital for an informed democracy, alleging that it may be used to limit access under the guise of privacy protection. Minister Ashwini Vaishnaw, though, has rubbished these allegations. Any personal information that is subject to disclosure under legal obligations under various laws governing our public representatives and welfare programs, the government claims will continue to be disclosed under RTI Act. Remember, the RTI Act was brought into effect by the UPA 1, which was headed by the former Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh. But what's the truth of it all? I'm being joined by Manish Barriarr, who's a political analyst, Pawan Duggal, who's a cybersecurity expert, as well as Kamruzman Chaudhary, who's a political analyst. He should be joining us shortly from now. Well, to you, Pawan Duggal, first. Pawan Duggal, what should we make out of this? Between the opposition and the centre, what's the truth?
Well, the reality is that the law DPDP Act has been passed by Parliament. The reality is that the Parliament in its wisdom has particularly allowed for this amendment of the RTI Act, which effectively means that certain portions are going to be curtailed. Now the scenario is, if that is the case, then it's always up to any person who's aggrieved by the said law to go and challenge its constitutional validity. And in case if a chunk of the MPs believe that maybe this is violative, then I think they are entitled to their legal remedies, which they are doing. They are filing their memorandums, but ultimately it will only be the courts of the country who will have to determine whether this particular act or the amendment by virtue of the DPDP Act is hindering more accountability, more transparency, because at the end of the day, it's only these entire two acts are subject to judicial scrutiny and judicial review. So the courts will have to decide. So the options are to go to the court and let it decide. Second option is to work with the government and say, can we actually go ahead and repeal some portion of the DPDP Act? Now, that's also possible. We'll have to wait and watch what happens. But at the end of the day, the Parliament in its wisdom decided certain things. That's what's part of the DPDP Act. At that point of time, these issues were not specifically discussed or debated at length. And now these issues have come up. It'll have to be dependent on how the parties take this on logically, but legally options are open. But ultimately, I believe till such time the Parliament does not amend or revise this particular law, this will continue to be the law of the land till such time the court of law, which is the courts in the country, go ahead and declare the same as unconstitutional.
So, Pawan Duggal, here's the thing. What do you make out of these allegations? Let's just break this down. Let me just try and get a perspective from somebody who is an expert. Pawan Duggal, when the opposition says that the RTI Act is going to be diluted, which means that there were exceptions before where the information could be curtailed. However, if it was sanctioned by one of the authorities, as I mentioned earlier, one of the three authorities, that information which is curtailed or not to be made public can still be made public. And that's an important part. Now the opposition claims 44(3) of DPDP Act nullifies that. Basically, if it doesn't need to be disclosed in public interest, it doesn't need to be disclosed. There's no exception to that. The government can decide to do so.
Well, the reason for this particular provision that came under the DPDP Act was very clear. Ultimately, till today, we didn't have a law on protection of personal data. For the first time, the DPDP Act has come in, which makes the data principle the central point of the data universe. Because without taking his or her consent and without giving notice to the said data principle, you will not be able to handle, or process the personal data. So since so much of premium has been given on protection of personal data, that's potentially one of the reasons why this particular new provision has been added, so that even indirectly, the provisions of the DPDP Act ought not to be violated, and the personal data of the concerned individuals need not be compromised under any circumstances. On the other hand, it can always be argued that, hold on, if you are making the personal data the foundation for non-disclosure, you are effectively putting in kind of a challenge to more accountability, more transparency, and to that extent, a lot of efficacy of the RTI Act could be potentially impacted. Now, it's important to note that today when we talk, there's not a single particular provision of law which has been set aside in the DPDP Act by a court of law. In fact, this entire issue has not been adjudicated much as yet. So we'll have to wait its adjudication. And if anybody is aggrieved by it, let's also remember the fact that the Digital Personal Data Protection Act 2023 is only passed by Parliament. It's not yet been into operation yet. So if the government wants, it can make appropriate changes by appropriate kind of modifications, but we'll have to wait and watch.
Kamruzman Chaudhary, if I can come to you. Kamruzman Chaudhary, you know, Pawan Duggal also mentioned about this. Why was this not discussed in Parliament?
No, that's the nature of the Modi government's approach. You know, they want to prioritize control over everybody. In this case of the digital spaces, which is the limited scope for an ordinary citizen to question the government, to get information from the government. By bringing in this act, what the Modi government has essentially done is stifle all sources of information to bring accountability to the system. We are a functional democracy. By bringing in such draconian acts, you see, you go back to the UPA times. We brought in the UPA brought in the RTI Act, which was a path-breaking legislation in which the government was at the doorstep of each and every individual. By simply bringing in this digital act, what has the government tried to do? We have talked hours and hours about the Pegasus software. What was the Pegasus supposed to do? It was trying to snoop on the person's individual, life, what he is doing at any point in time. But now by this act, it has been proved that Indian government or the BJP government had indeed procured the Pegasus software to snoop on other individuals. The privacy that we had in conversing with our own people or a business, these are going to be waived off once this act becomes operational. So it's very important now to get into
Manish
the
Barriarr,
basics.
do you agree with what Kamruzman is
and
saying?
somehow or the other repeal it. Either
Sneha ji, and to both my co-panelists. Am I audible to you?
Yes, please, go ahead, sir.
Sneha ji, am I audible to you? Yeah. So I've Mr. Kamruzman, pretty good with English, but he uses a lot of superlatives. But I felt that he kind of contradicted himself I feel that this DPDP Act basically strengthens both privacy and transparency. And even Supreme Court has upheld this kind of a balance. And there is a very famous case of this Puttaswamy judgment in 2017, where it ruled privacy as a fundamental right under Article 21. And DPDP basically implements this while preserving RTI's transparency. Now, let me make it very clear that this particular act, where people are talking about, that it violates RTI, is absolutely incorrect, because there is it says that under many circumstances, under government laws, as well as even under this DPDP Act, if the CIC wants, it can actually allow personal information to be published if it is required. So this entire debate over exceptions is not correct. In fact, this is something which I wanted to bring it to notice of, everyone. In fact, what it does is that there's a lot of, misleading by Congress party on this. It only stops fishing expeditions. For example, if you allow me, I'll just give you one or two examples. In old RTI Act, it actually invaded a lot of aspects, and there were many aspects which we are privy to, which Congress party did. Let me give you two examples. For example, Congress party this is not an allegation, this came out later on with one of the, one of the parties involved with Congress party under India Alliance. They said that Mr. Digvijay Singh, during Congress party rule, actually did a lot of things and harassed government officials and police officers in Gujarat government. That happened. So I think those kind of things that has already happened in our country,
Barriarr, there are
lot of
allegations
RTI
of
abuse has
snooping
happened.
under
I think
several governments,
needed to be
including
stopped.
BJP government.
But see, I will tell you, those are allegations and they have not been proved. That's one. Second, this is a very different matter. This is a matter where keeping our country's ethos, nuances, keeping and governance style in, taking into those kinds of consideration, this particular thing has been broadened. It has not been, removed as such. So
Okay.
I think there is a lot of, misleading kind of a statement
I think you want to make a point, Kamruzman. Go ahead, please respond to Manish Barriarr.
Yeah, basically he was citing about the Puttaswamy versus the Union of India and the Rajagopal versus State of Tamil Nadu cases, wherein the judgments affirm the privacy as an essential right, but also guide subsequent legislative and judicial interpretations on matter involving digital data and personal information. But the point out here is that when you are classifying large swathes of digital information as sensitive, the Act restricts the press's ability, I repeat, the press, the media's ability to access and disseminate information, undermining investigative journalism and transparency. And that's what, the Modi government is very much afraid of. To disseminate the actual knowledge, what's happening inside the departments, how the decisions are being made. We Congress party, we stand with freedom of speech. We stand with how the knowledge can be disseminated to the last man in this country. But the fact remains, you see,
Manish, this is an argument that is being made by many people. Many people who otherwise are also favoring DPDP. What Kamruzman Chaudhary is saying is an argument that many people are making. And one of the things that they are saying is, this is going to be essentially a very easy tool, one, to curtail journalism, to control press and the dissemination of information.
Absolutely not. In fact, you need to give me any one example, because DPDP is there for last 2 years. Give me one example. Any example, I'm sorry. So just one example where DPDP Act has been misused for curtailing information. I needed that with Mr. Kamrujaman also, right? And I'll also give you 2 examples, 3 examples, in fact, very quickly. In 2008, it was, Congress government denied RTI on 26/11 on security lapses. It was later leaked on by Congress allies. In 2013, when there was some queries on Chinese incursions, Congress party denied it, calling them classified. And more importantly, it was Congress party which didn't allow political parties to be a part of RTI. Right? It was always a part of political parties was a part of RTI, but it amended RTI and it excluded political parties. It shows so much of hypocrisy. You just see. So it's all posturing. When you start really looking at the track record of Congress party when it comes to privacy,
if you're making that argument, Manish Barriarr, it's not two wrongs make for a right. Because you're saying the manner in which Congress went about doing the RTI, making exceptions to the RTI, you can't take away legitimately something that is part of RTI. At least that's what the allegation is saying, that this is just posturing by the UPA1. That's a different thing to discuss altogether with the whole peripheral of political parties. Here we are talking about, yes, please.
No, Sneha Ji, that was not my point. That was only as a passing reference, just to show that the kind of integrity and sincerity which Congress party has towards this particular issue, right? That was my only point. But I can read it if you want to. The difference between what is there in DPDP and what is there in section 44(3). If you want to, I can read it and I can show you that there is no, with so much of confusion.
Manish, I had explained that. I had explained that. Manish, I had explained that. Let me just get in Kamruzman to respond to the allegations that they made, because I've actually explained those sections. Okay.
No, basically why we are spooked by this bill is the source of information that we had so long. And you must appreciate the UPA government that because of the RTI Act, when the information was available to everybody in the country, the numerous scams across various governments, whether the state, whether the central government, or whether some corporations or individuals, were exposed to the countrymen because of this RTI Act, mind you. But what does this Act say? Apart from this RTI angle, apart from data privacy, this Act also says that a service provider must be required to store and share vast amounts of user data, raising concerns about privacy breaches and the potential misuse of personal information. Where does the secrecy comes in here? Where is the data being saved? We have seen numerous examples wherein information of private individuals have been sold to unscrupulous elements to mine for their deeds. But then the basic point here is that the government,
allow me to just get in Pavan Dugal.
Passed this important bill is very much a problematic one.
Okay, Pavan Dugal, last word to you, Pavan Dugal. As a layperson who's watching all of this, and just allow me, Barriarr, I have very few minutes left. Let Pavan Dugal make that last word. To the layperson who's watching what's happening, what's unfolding, the allegations that's coming in, how should they approach this?
Well, first and foremost, everybody needs to understand that the Digital Personal Data Protection Act 2023 is still not in force. It's not yet been implemented because the government has been given the power to come up with the specific dates for specific sections to be implemented, and the government is still working on the draft rules, and that's the reason why, though it's been passed by Parliament, though it's published in the official gazette, it's still not the law of the land. So therefore now, in case if there's some concerns that are raised by a group of members of Parliament, and if a memorandum goes to the government is well within its powers to examine the same, but we'll have to realize that in case if there's any going to be need for amending, modifying or repealing a portion of the DPDP Act, it will have to be in the form of an amendment, which the government will have to work on. That's assuming the government will tend to agree to what's being said in the memorandum. I can't really comment to the same. So it's more of a political issue. From a legal standpoint, it's very clear the DPDP Act has been passed by Parliament. It is the law of the land.
But it is a really political issue, isn't it, Pavan Dugal?
Yes,
it is, at the end of the day, it is an issue of what is emerging as a right to privacy vis-a-vis right to information. So it's not really a political issue.
It can also be a legal issue, and that legal issue can only be adjudicated by courts of the country, whether it's the Supreme Court or different high courts in the jurisdiction. The beauty is this particular issue has still not come up for final disposal before the courts of the country. So one is either wait for the courts to adjudicate, alternatively work on the political level by parties, by the government, and try to come up with some kind of an amendment which satisfied all stakeholders. But from a layperson standpoint, this is the law of the land and will remain till such time it's repealed.
Or at least implemented. Manish Barriarr, you have your hands up, but I'm totally out of time. 5 seconds, I can't give you more than that.
Yeah, 5 seconds. 5 seconds. Just 5 seconds. Yeah, one, I think the draft rules are there, so I think this act would be now applicable by May, June. And second, this is for you and all the viewers. The revised provision essentially states personal information cannot be disclosed unless required under DPDP Act or other laws. It's so clear. And there is no, this entire, the word exception people are talking about, it's basically misleading the entire country. That was my, final point on this.
All right. Okay. Here's basically where the argument is, where it says that there were discretionary powers earlier with 3 authorities, and that's been totally nullified. So that itself is a point of debate, Manish Barriarr. We'll have to wait and watch which way this goes legally as well in courts as well as politically. Thank you very much, all 3 of you. Manish Barriarr, Pavan Dugal, as well as Kamruzman Chaudhary, thank you very much for your time. Well, moving on for now. Today,